Achilles and Hector. Dawn revealed the sleeping figures of the Trojan army spread around the plain. It ate the shadows of the Greek ships standing proud along the beach. Light inched across the cold sand in the shadows of the mighty walls. Men stirred, blew life into their small fires, warmed their stiff, cold legs and hands, and looked around. Each one knew in his heart that if he lived, he would remember this day forever. The pale light grew stronger, fragmenting across the constantly trembling ocean. Men began to reach for swords, shields, and breastplates. Achilles greeted the sun, prayed by the bear holder holding the body of Patroclus, and stepped into the growing light. He called the men together. Odysseus hobbled there with Diomedes, using spears as crutches. Agamemnon came and sat at a little distance apart. They marveled at the armor that Achilles wore. The sun glinted, bouncing, glittering, and shimmered across his bronze and silver breastplate. Achilles spoke. "My lord Agamemnon, this killing has gone on too long. Today I will go back to war." There was a moment of silence, and then the men, their hearts lifted by what they heard, howled their approval, thumping their sword hilts on their shields like drums of war. Achilles was back. Agamemnon rose as the noise died away, and he spoke. "My judgment was blinded by Zeus, by fate, and by my own anger. You should know, Achilles, that what was promised to you is yours. Briseis, who was brought to me against your will, has already been returned." The men began to cheer again, but Achilles held up his hand. "Agamemnon, king of men, we are wasting time when we could be in battle. I say we go take mighty towered Troy, the lovely Helen, and the loot that city promises. I will take Hector and leave his body for the carrion crowds and dogs." Once more the soldiers howled their approval. Odysseus stood up and then leaned on the butt of his battle spear. "Our men need to eat before they fight, Achilles. They are lesser men than you, and need food and drink for strength, and a sacrifice to the gods would be a good idea, Agamemnon, king of kings." While they ate and drank some wine, Agamemnon took a black boar down to the sea and sacrificed it with his bronze-blazed sword. The army gathered. Helmets high on rosy-plumed, great-bladed battle spears, on strong-ash staves, shield fiery in the morning light, they came marching up from the beaches and onto the plain. In Troy they heard the marching feet and thundered of swords and shields. From the city walls King Priam stood watching, with Hector's wife, noble Andromache, and Helen, from whom the armies died. They saw the chariots of their own prancing horses advancing, their armies marching to the thunder of hoofs and war drums. Closer to the city, the Trojan army looked down at their enemy and saw implacable, dark-faced Achilles riding toward them in his chariot. He had the look of a bringer of death in his blazing eyes. Achilles raised his spear and cried to the roaring horde, "I know I am doomed to die here, but I will not retreat. I will not stop until I give those Trojans their fill of bloody war. Now, my comrades, charge!" The Greeks fell on the Trojan army, and Achilles searched in the chaos for Hector. Zeus, seeing all of this, hurriedly gave the gods permission to join whichever side they liked. Then he sat back, took a sip of ambrosia from the golden beaker, and looked down on the roaring armies. Hera and Athena hurried to join the Greeks. Poseidon, the wave-maker, and Hephaestus joined them, and so did Hermes, the lucky bringer. Ares, Artemis, and Aphrodite joined the Trojans. The two armies leaped at each other's throats. The ground and mountains shuddered. Even in the underworld, the king of the dead was terrified by the clash of the armies and men. Achilles turned to his men and urged them on. Then he ran amuck, and the ground around him was black with blood and sticky from it. Chariot wheels spurted blood from the ground, covering the flanks of horses and the wheels and sides of Achilles' chariot as he dealt out death to any who dared to stand against him. Hector boasted that he was not afraid to confront Achilles, as the Greeks hurled the Trojans back to the walls of their city. High above the main gates, King Priam watched in horror as the slaughter went on against the very stones of Troy. He saw his beloved son Hector trying to rally the men. Helen, on the same walls, looked for Paris and did not see him. King Priam ordered that the gates of the city be opened to allow the retreating Trojans sanctuary. Achilles swept them toward their city, and then thought he saw Hector. He began to chase and thus allowed the Trojan army to crush through the huge gates. The Trojans safe, Apollo relieved himself. He had disguised himself as Hector. Furious, Achilles turned and raced back to the city. King Priam, watching him run, was dazzled by Achilles and his bronze armor. Andromache saw her husband outside of the walls and in danger from the fast-footed Achilles. Priam called down to his son not to fight this man alone. "He's a savage, Hector. Come into the city and confront your wife and your son. Pity me, do not throw your life away. If that man gets inside of our city, all of us will be enslaved or dead. It is not right that an old man should be left for the dogs to defile his nakedness. Come into the city, Hector. Come!" Priam cried out again. Hector took no notice. His mother cried out, and then his wife. Still, mighty Hector stayed to confront the figure running toward him, coming closer, closer. He thought, if I go into the city, I will be called a coward by the very worst of them. I have to stand and fight. Achilles of the fast feet was almost upon him. He looked as if he were on fire, the sun striking his bronze armor and points of light flickering off of his spearheads and the sword blade like tongues of flame. Hector turned, then, and Achilles ran, so he ran from the raging Greek around the walls of the great city. Hector ran, believing that, even as the latecomer to the war, Achilles would be easily worn out. He had forgotten that Achilles, known as Fleetfoot, could outrun horses. Twice they chased one another around the city, and then once more, until Athena came to Achilles and told him it was time to stand and fight. "Get your breath back, Achilles," she said, and she went to Hector to persuade him that it was time to confront fate and fight. "Achilles," called out the panting Hector, "I won't run any more. I'll fight and kill, or be killed. Can we, though, agree between ourselves and our gods? If Zeus allows me to kill you, I promise no outrage will happen to your body. All I will do is strip you of your armor, and I will give your corpse to the men untouched. Will you do the same for me?" Achilles could not believe his ears. "You must be crazy. I'd sooner eat my mother's heart than agree to anything with you. I won't rest until your blood flows and floods the gates of Troy. You must pay the price for killing my friends." Achilles hurled the spear. Hector ducked, and the spear flew over him as he mocked Achilles. "Out of practice, of course. You're nothing but hot air and pretty armor. Take this and eat it." Hector swung his long spear back and thrust it forward powerfully and straight enough to hit Achilles' shield. The spear bent on the bronze embossing. Achilles was not hurt, and he had another spear. Hector had no second spear. He drew out his bronze-bladed sword and charged it. Achilles, protecting himself with his shield, and searched the charging man for a place to aim to point his spear. There was an opening in the armor below Hector's chin. Achilles drove the war spear at this tiny target, and the rushing Hector thrust himself onto it. He dropped like a bull onto the bloody ground at Achilles' feet. Achilles looked down at the writhing enemy, curling and twitching around the spear that now pinned him to the ground. "You killed my friend Patroclus, and so you will pay for that. The dogs and the carrion birds are going to chew at your guts, while Patroclus burns on the pyre due with the reverence to the gods." Hector, choking on the spear shaft, begged Achilles to be merciful and to let his father Priam ransom his body, so that his wife and his mother could do him honor. Achilles refused. "You'll feed the dogs below your own city walls." Hector reminded him that he would die sometime, and that the gods would not forget what he had done to Hector, son of Priam, king of Troy. Achilles laughed in his face. Hector writhed around on the spear and died. Achilles, to his shame, took a knife, slit the flesh behind the dead man's ankles, tied a thong through them on the cord to that thong, and tied him behind the chariot. Hector's mother, his father, his wife saw Achilles drive the chariot 3 times around the city walls, hauling the dead Hector, his head thudding over the sand and rock. King Priam looked down from the stone walls and wept. He saw Greek soldiers run to marvel at the size and the beauty of mighty Hector. Each of them boldly kicked the naked hero, thrust a sword or spear into him, and mocked him shamefully. Andromache wailed a wild ululation of pity, shame, and anger, and the horror of knowing her dead husband would not be properly washed, prepared, and prayed over. She unpinned her hair, letting it fall to her face, and she knelt on the ground. She lifted the dirt and poured it over her raven head. She raked her face with her long fingernails to streak her cheeks in blood. Then she cried up more dirt and picked up more dirt and scattered as she cried, "Hector, I will burn your grave clothes so that we keep it in scented chest at home. You will lie naked for the worms to work on the dogs to eat. Your children have no father, and I no protector." Again and again the gates of the mighty city she scraped up the black dirt with her bloody nails and poured it all over her head. And the sun fell behind the proud ships beyond the plain, beyond the morning city.